Paul, thank you so much. I want to turn to Greg Cassidy and Chris, of course, to talk about their build along with one of Chris's kits from Conowingo Models. So Greg, welcome.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Let me get my screen share up. Chris, I assume if you want to say anything, you can say it at the end.
I'll be waiting for the dancing girls.
You missed them already. All right. Welcome. My name's Greg Cassidy. This is the first New Tracks build along. I call it the first one because Jim has lined up a number of other build alongs following this one, and I'm excited to see all of them. This one is the collaborative build of Conowingo Models Gray Street House Company House version. Tonight, which is part 4, we'll be installing the windows and doors, assembling the building and the porch. And as always, I'll be covering techniques that any modeler may know, but here's what I'm doing with this kit. First part we're going to tackle is windows. We need to keep the drafts out. So once you have your walls and your windows painted, as we did in the last session, it's time to put some glass in those windows. Now, the easy way to do this, of course, is you just put a piece of acetate behind the wall window openings like I have here, and then put the windows in place. I've seen modelers do that. I've done it a couple of times when I was in a hurry, but it's kind of the lazy way. It's your kit. You can if you want to, but I prefer to put the glass in the windows. It looks better. So I'll be showing you how to install Tichy acetate into Tichy windows, which is what comes with this kit. Once you cut them off of the sprue that carries them, you need to cut the little tabs off and get it flush with the edge of the window. I use a little knife to do this and just scrape it along the edge. The goal of this is to make sure that it fits inside the window frame. It needs to fit all the way in there. Then when I go to glue them in place, I use Tamiya extra thin cement. It's really nice, and it comes with this little plastic applicator. If you just touch it to the corner of the window when it's in place, the glue wicks underneath using capillary action, and it's fun to watch it happen. Once you have all your glass installed in the windows, it's time to put the windows and doors into the walls. I will usually use an ACC glue for this, but other glues will work. You need to keep in mind that you're gluing 2 different materials, a plastic and a wood. Once you have all your windows in place, we're not quite done. We want to be able to cover those windows. Some modelers like to assemble the model and then put the windows in place. Personally, I prefer to work on my walls when they're flat. If I'm putting windows and doors in, or if I'm putting any signs on, I'd rather do that before it's assembled. We don't want any peeping toms, so we're going to deal with some window covers here. Now, with the kit comes some manila cardstock. You can use that to put some blinds on your windows. They're easy to just cut and glue in place. I prefer to put curtains into houses if I'm building them. I've gotten all my curtain images off of the web. You can find ones that you like. Doesn't really matter what the window or the wall looks like. All you're going to be using is the curtain material. Once you've decided what you're going to put in what window, you just cut out the middle. If the curtains are already closed, it doesn't matter. You just cut them in half. And then you glue them behind the windows. You can have them mostly closed or mostly open. You need to keep in mind that you may have to work around some bracing or something. You can just use white glue a little bit on the top or on the side here to hold them in place. I also like to think of the rooms I'm putting the curtains in. If you have a corner room, well, it would typically have the same curtains on all the windows. So you want to make sure that your front and side windows, if they're supposed to be for the same room, will match. Excuse me. Next, we'll move on to assembling. I'm going to show you a couple ways of attaching the 1/16 inch corner trim. The first method is where you apply the corner trim before you actually assemble the building. In this case, I'm using blocks to hold the corner trim in place after they've been glued while they dry. And you want to make sure that your corner trim is flush with the back of the wall. When I put my corner trim in, I try to make it flush to the bottom and let it extend a little bit at the top. If it extends on both ends, that's not a problem either. You're going to be trimming where it extends beyond the wall. In this case, I matched the roof line. And also for this particular kit, the trim on the second story back window, you need to trim the bottom as well to fit in the notch. Now, the second way to attach trim is to put your walls together first, build your structure, and then put the trim in afterwards. If you're using this method, you need to make sure that your walls are matching up just right so that the trim will fit in that slot. Now we'll be assembling the walls. I always like this part because that's when the structure is really coming together. I'll usually glue together 2 sub-assemblies, depending on how complex the kit is, but in this case, we're just talking about 4 walls. So I'll use blocks to hold them in place and hold them at a 90-degree angle. In this case, I'm using method 1. You can see that the corner trim is already in place on the edges of some of the walls. Then once those 2 sub-assemblies are done, I'll glue the sides together and I'll clamp them or use blocks to hold them in place. You'll want to watch for any glue that squeezes out around the joints and remove that. This is gluing another set of walls together. I use another 90-degree angle here to make sure they're right before I put the blocks in place to hold them. In this case, you can see it's method 2, where we don't have the corner trim attached to the walls yet. Once I have those 2 halves ready to go together, I'll glue them together, again, making sure I have room for my corner trim. Then once the walls are glued together, I'll glue the corner trim in place. And like before, I'll let it extend a little bit beyond the roof line. Then I'll go ahead and cut the trim flush with the roof line. One thing I like to do as well is bevel the edges of my walls if they're going to meet a roof at an angle. That way the roof will sit flush. You can do this with either a sanding stick. I'll often do it with the wall on my Ultimation sander once I have the walls put together.
Greg, let me
Yes.
interrupt. Let me ask you a question.
Uh-huh.
What determines whether you put the trim boards in before or after?
I'd like to say it's how you've planned on putting the kit together, but once or twice I've started gluing the walls together before I put the trim in place because I was so excited and wanted to move ahead with it. Both ways work. I think modelers might find a way they like better. I will usually put the trim in place first when I remember to, because that way when I'm gluing the second wall in place, I have a little more area that I can apply the glue to hold everything together. But it's not a big enough difference that it really matters. It's just the way I usually go, but I've done it both ways.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. And now this is another thing that I will tend to do. It's not part of the kit, but I'll usually put a ridge pole in on the roof of kits that I put together. It's just an extra structural feature that I like to put in. It gives you a place to glue more of the roof to. It makes the kit a little bit stronger. You'll also see in the one photo where I have it sitting on the bracing. When we were talking about the bracing in module 2, I showed where I was going to leave space for a ridge pole, and that's what it's for there. Next, we'll move on to assembling the porch. You're going to measure and cut your porch boards. You want to have them overhang a little bit. I'll be covering how we're going to build the O-scale porch at the end of this segment. Before I do any finishing to them, I'll stick them to a piece of tape. I usually try and chew up the outer ends if it's a porch that needs to look weathered. These are the ends that would be exposed if the porch isn't quite sheltering them. And then one of the methods that I'll stain them with is by putting a stain on them, and then after it dries, about 15 minutes later, I'll come back and put a little bit more just on the outer ends where they would be more exposed. A second way of doing that is to use two different stains. In this case, I applied a lighter stain to them first, and then I come back with a darker stain, and again, just put that on the outer edges so that they look like they've weathered a little bit more out there. This is what they come out looking like. And in these, I ended up chewing up the ends after I had stained them. Again, that's just because I forgot to do it beforehand. Once you're done with those and they're dry, you can start applying the glue and gluing the porch boards onto the porch assembly. You want to leave a little bit of space between them and try to sort the boards so that you get some variety. You're going to have different wood and it would weather differently. This is what it looks like once they're all down. You can also use your knife and maybe break a board so it looks like it's a little more worn. You could have a missing board if you wanted to have it really look like it was deteriorated. So once we have the porch boards in place, it's time to glue the house onto the base. What I will do is run a bead of glue around the foundation or the bottom walls of the house. And then once you have it lined up and make sure that your overhang is equal on all sides, you can glue it down. And double check it when you're putting it down to make sure that it's even and you don't have any glue that's squeezing out. If you do have some, you can remove it with a toothpick or a wet brush, and then you'll want to weight it or clamp it while it dries. Once it's dried to the foundation, this is the point where I'll add a view block inside the building. Now, this is something you'd be doing if you're not lighting the building or you're not putting an interior in it. It's just something to keep you from looking through the structure. I cut mine from some of the roofing paper that came. You can use black construction paper, anything that'll keep you from looking through the building. Next, we're going to work on the porch posts. They're cut from the 3/32 strip wood that comes with it. You'll want to make them slightly taller than your front door, and you'll want to cut 3 of them. I'm only showing 2 here because we're going to be attaching these roof supports to them. Now, something that I wanted to do where I deviated slightly, and you don't need to, but it's just something I did, and it's a quick tip to show you how you can use materials that come in the kits. I wanted my porch roof to overhang slightly more than the porch roof supports that came with the kit allowed. Well, I looked at that piece of wood, the upper one that the porch supports were cut out of, and said, well, there's a lot more material there that has the same angle on it. So like the lower piece, I just cut above and below where they were. And then I got 2 pieces that have that same angle, but they're slightly larger. Again, like I say, this isn't necessary, but I just wanted my porch to overhang a little bit more. This is the difference in size with the ones that I cut out behind the ones that were already cut. Once you're assembling them, you want to put a little bit of glue on the very end of the roof support and then glue them to your posts. You want to make sure that as they dry, they keep a 90-degree angle. And you'll also want to glue these with the finished side down. And you'll see why we're doing that. We're going to end up with a little bit of a ledge at the top of the post once we put them in place. So you want to glue it to your porch and to the piece of corner trim that's on your house. Make sure that while you put it in place, it stays at a 90-degree angle. This is what they both look like when they're glued in place. And you can now see the 2 little ledges on the inside of the posts that were left over. Now, the reason for those ledges is we're going to use the 1/32 by 3/32 trim and put a crossbeam across the two posts. You glue those in place, and you glue your third middle post in place at the same time. I'll show you what those two little blocks are for in a moment. When I'm gluing these pieces together, just like any other type of outside structure, I'll double check it to make sure stuff is at a right angle and that stuff is sitting level, unless you're really trying to make the building look like it's falling apart. There are times you don't want it to look right, but in this case, I did. Now, those little blocks, I just cut them off of the excess of the posts and glue them on the inside of the roof supports. They just add a little bit of strength there. And since I knew these buildings were going to be handled some, I wanted the porch roof to be strong. It's not necessary, but sometimes I'll do something like that. And once we put the roof on, you won't be able to see them at all. Now, everything that I've shown is for the kit, the HO kit that comes with the supplied porch. I'm going to go over how you can build a foundation and porch for the O-scale kit. It's just the gray street house, and it doesn't come with the porch and the foundation. Most of what I've shown up to this point will apply in terms of windows and structure building. But now we're going to go over how to take care of the foundation and porch. You'll need to build a foundation. There'll be a small amount of scratch building involved, but Chris and I have looked and found that this foundation that's available from rail scale models, their RSM D2520, will be a really good choice for building a foundation for the O-scale kit. I recommend that you get two 12-inch strips. You can get them from 3/8 or 1/2 inch high, and 3/16 inch thick should be plenty to hold the house up. You can get these from railscalemodels.com, and I'll have their web link in the chat after the presentation. Now, for making the porch, again, you'll have to do a little bit of scratch building. These photos are from when I built the first one of these, where it didn't have a porch and I scratch built it myself. You'll want to use some of the leftover sheets that the walls came out of for your clapboard roof support. I just drew on the back and cut out a couple of roof supports. You end up with 2 of each size, but you only need to use 1 of each side. And then you're going to measure and cut your floor porch. This is the scribe siding that I had mentioned you would need in the first session if you were building the O-scale model and wanted to put the porch on it. So once you cut your scribe siding, you want to make sure that it and your roof supports are the same measurement so that they'll be able to sit on the post. I glued my roof supports onto the walls, and then I put a cross beam all the way across them just for extra strength. You want to make sure that they're both at the same height on the wall. And after that, you'll be gluing your porch floor onto the foundation. You may need to support it while it dries. It'll be right underneath the front wall. This is what it'll look like when you've got the porch floor and the roof supports glued in place. I didn't have a foundation on this one yet. I added one later, but this is how you could scratch build the porch and the roof supports to fit. And then again, you'll just make your posts out of strip wood. It would probably be something around 3/16, and you'll add a cross brace and a middle post like I have here. This shows you when I was scratch building mine, I actually set the cross brace back a little bit and had it angled at the same angle as the roof supports. So that's it for the construction part. Next week, we'll be talking about putting on the roofs and adding the details. But coming up before we end this, I have some slides that Geoff Bunza is going to talk about if you want to be lighting this. So I'm going to turn it over to Geoff.
Okay, There were a bunch of things that as I was building the house, I decided that it wasn't a residential house. It was actually a storage facility for some small business. So one of the things that I changed was the deck in front of the house was going to be more of a loading dock. And instead of the individual boards, I used the remaining material that was left over from the sideboards on the supports for the supposed porch. So that explains the difference in the deck, and it's a little bit wider as well. There will be no covering for it. You'll see why in a bit. This was actually all motivated by one observation and one decision that I'll get to at the end. The floor is actually a piece of paper, a black piece of paper. That's a piece of paper, not card. I actually colored that black with a magic marker, mounted it, glued it, and trimmed it. So that's what you see there. Next slide. The corner block that I originally had designed was meant to go in the front window corner. Can you go back a slide, Greg? That lower window right corner that you're looking at, yeah, right there. That's where the lighting was going to go. And originally, I had thought to maximize the room behind that. I might have even thought about putting materials in, and decided that I wasn't going to go that direction. So instead of maximizing it, I was going to minimize it. Go to the next slide, please. And minimizing it meant fitting it barely above the windows and all the way to the back. And what it meant for me was instead of using a 3mm LED, I went to a 0603 LED, which I had, which was already pre-wired. And you can see the two wires at the top right there. That is actually the top of the block, which I made out of some spare wood that I had, cut and fit to that corner to minimize the block, not to maximize it. Those wires were fed through a hole that I made. The hole was big enough to put the LED through, and then it needed to be both glued, quote unquote, and fixed, but also it needed to have a light block. So what I did was I took a small piece of wood and shaped it into a point and then jammed it in so it was like a peg. And you can see the top and the bottom of the peg there. And then on the bottom, you see the LED, which was simply turned right angles to be flush with what would wind up being the ceiling of that light block. Next slide, please. The original LED was one of these very bright bluish tint, which you can see mounted and lit on the far left. A little Tamiya clear orange paint on top of the LED, turned it from blue to a yellow tint, which I wanted to represent an incandescent light in the room. And then the windows, after they had panes put in them, I shot with dull coat. And I do that, and I hope that you can see a slight difference. It actually it's not a light block, and it doesn't come out looking like a frosted window. It looks like a dirty window when you actually are staring at it, but it distributes the light over the window such that when you light it behind, you really get the effect that the room is lit. So it enhances the lighting in the room. And I have no intention of decorating the inside of it. That was the best I know I was going to do. So that's the effect that I was shooting for. That's the effect I got. And I hope you can see it in that view. Next slide. So why the change? Well, if you look closely, there's no window on the second floor front on the right. On the second floor front on the right, there's actually a door. And that door is a piece of window material that got laser cut out that I reversed and scribed for vertical boards. And that's going to be a door. Now, right now, that's a temporary door. And if you look above it, there's a beam sticking out from the house. You could see it more easily. Yeah, very good. On that side, that typically would be a beam that would be attached to the roof runner on the top. And in days of old, that's how you would get a second floor crane or with an attached pulley. And you can see the pulley there. The pulley comes from the other side of the local hobby shop where they cater to people making wooden ships. So that is a pulley that's about 1/8 of an inch across. The strap around it is a piece of brass, or no, I think it's a phosphor bronze, 005 phosphor bronze that I simply cut and shaped, and then put through an 040 piece of wire and soldered it to both sides and then colored it. That's a working pulley. Now you might say, well, why go through all the trouble to make a working pulley? Well, I started with all to say it was the pulley that made everything change. Because as you might guess, if you look down into the house on the right, I've maximized the rest of the area in the house. And I could easily fit in there a very small servo that would raise and lower something on the other end of a rope around that little pulley and just animate part of the house with the doors or door opening and then some crate being raised and lowered. So the rest of the house needs to be decorated with crates and rubbish and different things around the front loading dock, not deck. And that necessitated the changes in the house. But nonetheless, you get the idea of with one LED, you can focus on lighting that room on two sides. And that's it.
Fantastic. I can't thank you guys enough. That's really a beautiful presentation for both of you. Thank you so much, Greg.